By late 1944, U.S. forces in the Pacific were closing in fast, now within striking distance of the Japanese-occupied Philippines. These islands weren't just symbolic, they were critical. Japan relied on them for raw materials and, more importantly, as a lifeline to the oil flowing from the Dutch East Indies. Losing the Philippines would choke their war machine, and everyone knew it. After months of heated debate, U.S. commanders finally locked in their decision. They backed General Douglas MacArthur's plan to seize the southern island of Mindanao first, then push north. This wasn't just strategy, it was personal. MacArthur knew that once American troops landed, pressure would explode to liberate Manila. He had made a public promise to return after the brutal retreat of 1942, and now he was determined to make good on it. With air cover from Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 38, U.S. carrier strikes tore through the region. Around 500 Japanese land-based aircraft were wiped out, and what they found shocked them. Enemy resistance around Mindanao was far weaker than expected. This opened the door to something bigger. In early September, Halsey pushed a bold idea. Why wait? He urged commanders to move the main invasion up from December to October. The Joint Chiefs approved, but this rush created serious risks. The invasion fleet would be guarded by the 7th Fleet's older battleships and lighter escort carriers, and the coming monsoon season meant land-based airfields couldn't be used. That was dangerous. MacArthur demanded extra air protection and insisted Task Force 38 stay close. Pacific Fleet Commander Chester Nimitz agreed, but he gave Halsey a powerful extra order. If the chance came to destroy a major part of the Japanese fleet, that mission came first. That message never reached MacArthur, who had blocked direct communication between Halsey's 3rd Fleet and his own 7th Fleet. A crack was forming at the top. On the other side, Japan was scrambling. Their plan was called Shogo, meaning victory operation, though many commanders knew the name was wishful thinking. Years of losses had drained their air power and veteran pilots, but they still had monsters like the Yamato-class battleships and destroyers armed with deadly long-range torpedoes. Even so, Japan's combined fleet was massively outmatched. The U.S. 3rd and 7th Fleets together fielded 34 fleet and escort carriers, an overwhelming force. Internal rivalry between Japan's Army and Navy made things worse, with planning split and uncoordinated. While they expected an attack on the Philippines, they weren't sure where, so backup plans were made for places like Formosa. Parts of the fleet waited at Linga Roads, far from the action and nearly out of fuel. Once they sailed, there would be no turning back. That meant days would pass before they could even reach an invasion force, making interception unlikely. Still, by October, attacking the American landings remained the goal. Japanese Fleet Commander Admiral Somu Toyota made his move. Confident the U.S. would strike Leyte, he split his forces into 3 groups. The strongest was a massive diversionary force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, built around 2 Yamato-class battleships, a final gamble with everything on the line. Once the U.S. invasion begins, Japan's plan finally goes into motion. One force is set to race through the San Bernardino Strait, slip into Leyte Gulf, and smash straight into the American invasion fleet from the north. At the same time, a second force under Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima is ordered to push in from the south, backed by an attached group of older warships. It's a full pincer move, risky and desperate. Hovering behind it all is Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's carrier force, now labeled the Mobile Force Main Body. On paper, it looks dangerous, but the truth is brutal. These carriers are short on aircraft and even shorter on experienced pilots. Their real mission isn't combat, it's bait. They're meant to lure Admiral Halsey's Task Force 38 away from Leyte, pulling American carriers out of position at the worst possible moment. The entire plan is fragile. It depends on perfect timing and flawless coordination, something Japan has failed to achieve before. Even Japanese officers privately admit it's unlikely to work. By the time their fleets arrive, most U.S. troops will already be ashore, dug in, and fully supplied. By early October, both sides brace for impact, and the first real clash explodes not at sea, but in the skies over Formosa. To soften the battlefield before the Leyte invasion, Task Force 38 unleashes a massive air assault. Starting October 12th, American carriers launched nearly 1,370 sorties, ripping through Japanese airfields and destroying more than 100 aircraft in a matter of days. Japanese Air Commander Fukudome can barely hide his despair, admitting that their fighters were nothing but eggs thrown against a stone wall. Still, orders come down demanding a decisive air battle. Reluctantly, Japan commits planes originally reserved for the Shogo operation, scraping together around 860 operational aircraft to face Task Force 38's nearly 1,000 planes. On paper, the numbers look close. In reality, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Many Japanese pilots have almost no combat experience. Their plan is to overwhelm U.S. defenses with large mixed formations, hoping sheer chaos will break through American fighters and radar-guided anti-aircraft fire. Radar operator Mike Carney recalls seeing waves of 75 to 100 aircraft at a time. U.S. pilots quickly realize this isn't a coordinated strike force. It's a messy air mob filled with mismatched planes flying without discipline or cohesion. The result is brutal. American fighters shoot down or scatter most attackers, but Japan still lands a few painful blows. Torpedoes slam into the heavy cruisers USS Canberra and USS Houston, leaving both badly damaged. Those hits come at a staggering cost. Between October 10th and 17th, Japan loses roughly 500 aircraft, while the U.S. loses only 89. Worse, Japanese commanders mistakenly believe they've sunk as many as 17 American ships. Acting on that false confidence, Admiral Soemu Toyota orders Vice Admiral Shima to move in and finish the job. The Americans see an opportunity and deliberately use their crippled cruisers as bait. Shima approaches cautiously, senses something is wrong, and retreats almost immediately. The moment slips away. On October 17th, Douglas MacArthur launches his amphibious force toward Leyte. With time running out, Soemu Toyota finally activates Shogo, aiming to strike Leyte Gulf by October 24th. But cracks are already showing. Delays at Brunei's slow Vice Admiral Kurita's refueling, and Japan's tight timetable begins to unravel fast. Time is already working against Japan. Submarines need nearly 48 hours to prepare, and Ozawa's crews scramble to relocate air units and hoist aircraft onto carriers using cranes. Worse, many pilots barely know how to land on a carrier at all, which forces Vice Admiral Kurita to split his fleet into two separate forces. The goal is a pincer strike into Leyte Gulf, while Vice Admiral Shima's force sails south from Japan and plans to enter through the Surigao Strait. Inside Kurita's command, morale is shaky. Officers openly dislike the plan. The rushed schedule means they'll attack in daylight, not under cover of darkness like they trained for, and they'll miss their chance to hit the invasion fleet during the landings. Still, Kurita tries to rally them, urging belief over logic. He tells his officers that there are such things as miracles, insisting this battle could still turn the tide of the war if they meet the enemy head-on and fight without hesitation. With fuel running low, Kurita orders his ships through the Palawan Passage, an area crawling with American submarines. It's a gamble driven by desperation. His fleet lacks proper anti-submarine gear, and destroyers aren't deployed as a defensive screen. That mistake hits hard. On October 23rd, U.S. submarines ambush the formation, sinking 2 heavy cruisers and badly damaging a third, including Kurita's own flagship. Japan manages one small counterpunch. Remnants of their second air fleet relocate to the Philippines to support Kurita. Losses remain brutal and few planes break through, but one attack changes everything. A single 550-pound bomb slams through the deck of the carrier USS Princeton and detonates inside the hangar. Fires spread fast, triggering more explosions. As the light cruiser USS Birmingham pulls alongside to help fight the flames, disaster strikes. Princeton's torpedo magazine explodes, killing and wounding more than 650 sailors aboard Birmingham and sealing Princeton's fate. The carrier is scuttled soon after. The hit owes something to luck, but also to how spread out Task Force 38 has become. Of its 4 task groups, 2 are returning from operations, 1 patrols east of Luzon, and 1 guards the San Bernardino Strait. William Halsey orders all groups back, but several are simply too far away to matter on October 24th. That gap proves critical. When Kurita's force pushes toward Leyte Gulf through the Sibuyan Sea, only Task Group 38.2 stands in the way. It's the weakest group, with just 1 fleet carrier and 2 escort carriers. Gerald Bogan orders pilots to concentrate on the biggest targets, the battleships Yamato and Musashi. Wave after wave of Avengers, Helldivers, and Hellcats slam into Musashi. She's hit by multiple bombs and at least 7 torpedoes, causing massive flooding. Japanese damage control keeps her afloat for hours, even as her crew fires back with ferocious anti-aircraft fire. One American pilot recalls feeling shockwaves so powerful he thought his wings would snap every time the battleship's massive guns fired. Crippled and burning, Musashi finally turns west with 2 escorts, but the attacks don't stop. By 7 p.m., she's been struck by at least 16 bombs and 11 torpedoes. She rolls and sinks, taking roughly 1,000 of her 2,400 crew with her. In the entire war, Musashi never fires a single shot at another ship in battle. Shaken but not broken, Takeo Kurita briefly orders a retreat to the west. Hours later, he reverses course again and presses forward toward Leyte Gulf, pushing his fleet into the heart of the storm ahead. American pilots spot Vice Admiral Kurita's initial withdrawal and immediately assume his force is finished. Exaggerated damage reports spread fast, reinforcing the belief that Japan's main threat is out of the fight. But that confidence is misleading. By focusing nearly all their strikes on Musashi, U.S. aircraft leave most of Kurita's remaining ships largely untouched. One damaged heavy cruiser does peel away, but the core of the force survives and keeps moving. While U.S. planes continue attacks in the Sibuyan Sea, danger is building to the south. That afternoon, American aircraft spot Vice Admiral Nishimura's southern force heading toward Leyte Gulf. The warning gives the 7th Fleet time to prepare, and they don't waste a second. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf sets a classic naval trap in the Surigao Strait. 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, nearly 24 destroyers, and dozens of torpedo boats take up positions at staggered ranges ready to strike. As the Japanese force enters the strait, U.S. destroyers launch devastating torpedo attacks, sinking 2 destroyers and the battleship Fuso before the big guns even speak. What follows is historic. U.S. battleships open fire in what becomes the last battleship-to-battleship gunnery duel in history. American radar-directed fire overwhelms the Japanese ships. One survivor later describes the chaos, saying the ship shook constantly from near misses, instruments failed, and communication systems went dead under the pounding barrage. Once again, torpedoes deliver the killing blow. They rip into the Japanese battleship Yamashiro, sealing her fate and ending the southern threat in brutal fashion. For a brief moment, Vice Admiral Shima appears ready to support Nishimura, but one look at the slaughter convinces him otherwise. He turns away, retreating north. U.S. forces half-heartedly pursue, but the chase is abandoned by late afternoon, a decision that will soon matter more than anyone realizes. At 4 p.m. on October 24th, Task Force 38 detects Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's carrier force to the north. Admiral William Halsey now faces a massive choice. He can stay put and guard the San Bernardino Strait against Kurita's weakened force, or race north to finally destroy Ozawa's carriers. With the ships available, Halsey could technically do both, but U.S. doctrine discourages fighting 2 major battles at once. Halsey makes his call. He sends all of Task Force 38 north, determined to finish the Japanese carriers that escaped destruction earlier in the war. Here's the problem. An overloaded radio network and a confusing command structure mean this move isn't clearly communicated. Admiral Thomas Kincaid, commanding the 7th Fleet far to the south, assumes Halsey's battleships are still guarding the San Bernardino Strait. He won't learn the truth until it's too late. By dawn, Kurita's force slips through the strait unnoticed. At 6:47 a.m., moving south along the coast of Samar, Japanese lookouts spot tiny shapes on the horizon. It's the lightly armored escort carriers of 7th Fleet's Taffy 3, and both sides are stunned. One American sailor recalls seeing what looked like toothpicks stretching across the horizon, ship after ship. The Japanese fleet is still shifting into a daytime anti-aircraft formation, limiting their response at first, but within 15 minutes they open fire. Takeo Kurita believes he's facing full-sized U.S. fleet carriers and rushes to smash their decks before planes can launch. The attack is fast, chaotic, and dangerously uncoordinated, and the battle explodes from there. This moment marks history. For the very first time, a Japanese surface warship opens fire on a U.S. aircraft carrier. Chaos erupts instantly, and the odds are brutally uneven. Taffy 3's commander, Clifton Sprague, reacts without hesitation. He orders his escort carriers to turn east, racing away from Kurita's battleships while turning into the wind to help launch aircraft faster. Every plane is sent airborne, even those without bombs or ammo. At the same time, his ships dump thick smoke screens to hide their escape. The conditions help. Heavy humidity keeps the smoke hanging low over the sea, making it harder for Japanese gunners to see. Rain squalls roll through, briefly swallowing ships from view. Aircraft from nearby Taffy 2 scramble to help, but the Japanese keep coming hard. The battleship Yamato opens fire with her massive 18-inch guns from nearly 27 kilometers away. Even without direct hits, the shells explode underwater near U.S. ships, warping hulls and wrecking equipment. The captain of USS White Plains later recalls a salvo that twisted the ship violently, throwing crew members off their feet and ripping heavy gear loose from its mounts. To make targeting easier, Japanese shells are mixed with colored dye, lighting the sky with terrifying flashes. The splashes creep closer and closer. Sprague knows he has no choice. He orders 3 destroyers to charge straight at the enemy. The destroyers are hopelessly outmatched, but they go in anyway. One torpedo slams into a Japanese cruiser, knocking it out of the fight. Other torpedoes miss, and the destroyers are hammered by return fire. Yamato's smaller guns hit USS Johnston 3 times, but she ducks into a rain squall just in time. USS Howell isn't as lucky. She struck more than 20 times and sinks with most of her crew. As Kurita pushes his own destroyers forward, Johnston attacks again, forcing the Japanese to launch torpedoes from bad angles and score no hits. The move buys precious time, but now Japanese fire locks onto Johnston. Soon, Johnston is overwhelmed and sinks. A Japanese officer later recalls seeing American sailors floating in the water, some half-dressed, clinging to lifeboats. A machine gun is raised in anger, but a voice from the bridge cuts through the moment, ordering, "Don't shoot at escaping men, stop firing." Even in battle, restraint breaks through. Meanwhile, U.S. aircraft never stop attacking. Torpedoes, strafing runs, and non-stop harassment disrupt Japanese gunnery. Even when shells hit the carriers, their light armor causes armor-piercing rounds to pass straight through without exploding. Still, damage mounts. An indirect hit cripples USS Gambier Bay, forcing her to fall behind. Japanese ships close in, and she's battered until she capsizes and sinks. But the Japanese are bleeding too. Despite launching attacks with little coordination, U.S. pilots create constant confusion. Their strikes help sink 3 Japanese cruisers and damage many more. The pressure builds fast. Crucially, Takeo Kurita still believes he's facing powerful U.S. fleet carriers, not lightly armored escort ships. As losses stack up and confusion spreads, he makes a decision that will echo through history. Just as damage to Taffy 3 is peaking, Kurita orders a withdrawal, turning his fleet back through the San Bernardino Strait. Against impossible odds, the smaller force survives, not through strength, but through nerve, sacrifice, and relentless pressure. But the nightmare for Taffy 3 isn't over yet. Just hours after Takeo Kurita pulls back, a new and terrifying threat slams into the fleet. A wave of Japanese suicide aircraft dives straight into the escort carriers. One of them strikes USS St. Lo, triggering massive explosions that sink the ship in minutes. This marks the first successful organized kamikaze attack in naval history, and it changes the war instantly. This desperate new tactic makes its deadly debut during the battles for the Philippines. To understand how it began, military aviation historian Christoph Bergs explains that suicide-style attacks weren't completely new. As he notes, damaged pilots had occasionally tried to crash into enemy ships earlier in the war. He points to incidents as far back as 1942, including an attempted strike against USS Lexington. Similar acts happened on both sides, usually when pilots knew they couldn't make it home. But by October 1944, everything changes. Japan officially turns suicide attacks into a planned and standardized tactic across both the Army and Navy air services. This wasn't spontaneous anymore, it was policy. Several commanders are credited with shaping the program, including Lieutenant Colonel Motoharu Okamura, Admiral Masafumi Arima, and Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who becomes known as one of the main architects of the kamikaze strategy. Arima himself dies on October 15th, reportedly after attempting to ram the U.S. carrier USS Franklin. Shortly after, Onishi pushes the idea even further, issuing direct orders for suicide attacks to be carried out in the Philippines. His reasoning is cold and calculated. Japanese air units in the region are already under crushing pressure with little chance of survival. Onishi reportedly tells pilots they are unlikely to live much longer anyway, and that suicide missions offer the best chance to inflict serious damage before the islands are lost. The first organized kamikaze strikes catch Allied forces completely off guard. Even Japanese commanders are surprised by how effective they are. Early Allied estimates show suicide attacks are nearly 10 times more likely to score a hit than conventional bombing runs. The results are devastating. Roughly 40 Allied ships are sunk or damaged in this early phase alone. 7 aircraft carriers are hit, including USS St. Lo, which goes down in flames. And this is only the beginning. Encouraged by early success, Japan rapidly expands the program. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the kamikaze effort grows dramatically as the reality sets in that Imperial Japan is running out of time. Special attack units are formally created, although not every pilot assigned to suicide missions belongs to one of these units. Between late 1944 and 1945, the number of identified suicide attacks increases by roughly 60%. As Allied forces push closer to Japan, especially during the brutal fighting around Okinawa in April and May of 1945, the scale intensifies even further. Hundreds of aircraft are thrown into waves of suicide missions as Japan's final defenses begin to collapse. What began as desperation in the skies over Leyte quickly becomes a defining and horrifying chapter of the Pacific War, signaling just how far the conflict has descended as the sun sets on Imperial Japan. From October 1944 through March 1945, suicide attacks continue at a terrifying pace, but something unexpected happens. Despite more aircraft being thrown into these missions, the number of successful hits barely increases. The shock factor is wearing off, and the Allies are adapting fast. One of the most famous countermeasures is the VT fuse, also known as the variable time fuse. The name itself is a cover, designed to hide how advanced it really is. Unlike old-style timed shells that burst into black puffs in the sky, the VT fuse uses a proximity sensor. It sends out a signal, listens for a return, and detonates at the perfect moment when an aircraft gets close. The results are massive. Between October 1944 and March 1945, once a Japanese aircraft enters ship-based anti-aircraft range, there's roughly a 73% chance of a hit or near miss against it. But by April and May 1945, that number drops to around 43%, and it keeps falling as the war drags on. This clearly shows how improved anti-aircraft guns, fire control, and technology are stripping away the effectiveness of suicide attacks. But guns alone aren't the real game changer. Early warning systems and fighter interception matter even more. Radar, radio communication, and a clear command structure allow Allied forces to spot incoming attacks long before they reach the fleet. Radar-equipped destroyers are placed far ahead of the main task force as picket ships. When incoming aircraft are detected early, fighters are vectored in to intercept. The difference is huge. If a suicide aircraft is intercepted just 10 miles from a ship, it still has about a 50% chance of reaching its target. But if it's intercepted 50 miles out, that chance drops to around 2%. That's the difference between chaos and control. Because of this layered defense, only about 1/3 of all suicide aircraft ever get close enough to threaten a task force. Early detection and fighter interception become the single most effective countermeasure, with anti-aircraft fire acting as the final safety net. Carriers are often seen as the main targets, but the reality is different. Most successful hits are actually scored against auxiliary vessels, not fleet carriers. Transport ships, large landing ships, and radar picket destroyers take the brunt of the damage. These pickets are usually the first ships pilots see, and many attackers have minimal training and poor target recognition, so they go for whatever appears first. Roughly 170 hits are recorded against destroyers and auxiliary ships, compared to only about 25 hits against carriers. The ships doing the most dangerous early warning work end up paying the highest price. By the end of the war, nearly 4,000 Japanese pilots are sent out on suicide missions. These attacks result in roughly 450 hits or near misses, sinking 66 Allied ships and damaging hundreds more. Allied losses are severe, with approximately 6,200 killed and around 8,700 wounded. Even with early tactical success, the bigger picture doesn't change. Operationally and strategically, suicide attacks fail to turn the tide of the Pacific War. The Allies adapt, absorb the losses, and keep advancing, while Japan's options continue to shrink fast. And with that, the handoff is made back to real-time history. But the debate doesn't end there, not even close. In the years since, historians have fiercely argued over whether Takeo Kurita could have pushed on into Leyte Gulf and fulfilled Shogo's objectives by attacking the American invasion fleet. It's one of the most controversial what-ifs of the entire Pacific War. Kurita later gives several reasons for his withdrawal. He cites exhaustion after days of non-stop combat, fear of devastating air attacks, dwindling fuel reserves, and confusion about the true strength of American forces. But critics argue those explanations don't fully settle the question. By that point, the only U.S. ships likely left inside Leyte Gulf were mostly empty transports. Some Japanese officers, including Rear Admiral Kogi Shima, argued Kurita didn't want to waste his fleet attacking ships with little military value. He wanted a decisive battle against American warships, not a hollow victory. One Japanese account later explains their mindset clearly. They believed that even if they entered Leyte Gulf, the transports would already be gone, and any success would be minor at best. They were prepared to fight to the last man, but only if it meant a meaningful battle. Dying gloriously mattered more than sinking empty hulls. They were convinced multiple U.S. carrier groups were nearby, and that they were surrounded. Their shore-based air force had been largely inactive, but they believed that one successful strike could still trigger a decisive fleet engagement. Even if destruction followed, they believed such an end would be honorable. What Kurita doesn't know is that Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa has successfully lured away Task Force 38. But even with that knowledge, American forces still have the ability to react quickly. As Kurita withdraws westward, William Halsey turns north and launches his attack on Ozawa's decoy force off Cape Engano. The Americans still see the Japanese carriers as a serious threat, unaware that most of their aircraft have already been destroyed. In the early hours of October 25th, Task Force 38 strikes hard. U.S. planes focus on Ozawa's one fleet carrier and 3 light carriers. Ozawa can muster just 13 aircraft in defense, a tragic reflection of Japan's dwindling air power. U.S. pilot Bill Davis, flying a Hellcat from USS Lexington, later recalls a moment burned into his memory. After his dive, he finds himself just feet from the carrier's bridge, close enough to see Japanese officers and sailors clearly. He even spots an admiral in full dress uniform, sword at his side. Traveling over 500 miles an hour, he only catches a glimpse, but the image stays with him forever. In a coordinated assault, American planes hammer the carrier Zuikaku with armor-piercing bombs and 6 torpedoes. She lists heavily as fires rage below deck. The crew assembles on the flight deck as the captain delivers a final address. Only after the ship's colors are lowered does he give the order to abandon ship. Zuikaku slips beneath the waves soon after, taking a symbol of Japan's carrier fleet with her. By afternoon, U.S. aircraft sink 1 destroyer and 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, crippling the last. Despite launching the largest carrier air attack of the war, with 527 sorties, the results feel strangely incomplete. Japanese evasive maneuvering, intense anti-aircraft fire, and pilot fatigue all reduce accuracy. When urgent calls for help reach Halsey from the 7th Fleet to the south, he can't finish off the retreating Japanese surface force. His fast battleships turn south too late, moving too slowly to catch Kurita. They manage to sink only a lone destroyer. With that, the Battle of Cape Engano closes the final chapter of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Major naval combat ends, marking the conclusion of the largest naval battle in history, fought across vast seas while brutal land battles rage at the same time on Leyte itself. Even today, historians still argue about where the Battle of Leyte Gulf truly begins and ends, and that uncertainty spills straight into the casualty numbers. U.S. naval losses are often listed as roughly 473 killed, 1,110 missing, and about 1,220 wounded. But those figures don't tell the full story. They don't include another 1,750 American prisoners of war who were killed when a U.S. submarine unknowingly sank the Japanese transport Lisbon Maru on October 24th. That tragedy alone complicates how losses are counted and remembered. Japanese casualties are estimated at around 13,000 killed. In terms of ships, the contrast is striking. The U.S. loses 11 ships out of roughly 300 involved, while Japan loses 28 of the 69 ships assigned to Shogo. On the surface, Leyte Gulf looks like a crushing American victory, but not everyone agrees the outcome was maximized. Some critics argue the U.S. could have achieved even more with fewer losses, and many of those arguments land squarely on Admiral William Halsey. His detractors claim he took the Japanese bait too eagerly, giving Japan its only real opening during the battle. Intelligence officers had warned against chasing the northern carriers, yet Halsey committed fully. Though popular with the public, Halsey's relationships with fellow commanders were tense. His career momentum appeared to be slowing compared to figures like Raymond Spruance and Douglas MacArthur. Some historians suggest he was chasing a decisive moment to cement his legacy, even if it meant leaving the San Bernardino Strait uncovered. Supporters push back hard. They argue it's unfair to judge Halsey using information only available after the battle. Chester Nimitz had explicitly ordered him to prioritize enemy carriers if they revealed themselves. U.S. intelligence on Japanese movements was shaky, and communications between fleets were unreliable at best. Halsey later defends his actions, explaining that it seemed pointless to guard the San Bernardino Strait when Kurita's force appeared shattered. He believed the Japanese battleships had been crippled in the Sibuyan Sea and posed no serious threat to the 7th Fleet. The bigger issue goes beyond one man. The entire U.S. command struggled under a tangled and fragmented structure. Coordinating two previously separate commands while managing the clashing personalities of leaders like MacArthur and Halsey created confusion at critical moments. Even so, the verdict from history is clear. Leyte Gulf stands as a decisive U.S. victory. Japanese commanders openly admit it. One later reflects that the enemy swept the seas clean, leaving nothing behind. The sense was unmistakable. The war at sea had been lost. For many Japanese naval officers, the defeat wasn't shocking. Confidence in Shogo was low even before the battle began. Historians now argue the plan had little chance of success, even if everything had gone perfectly. Some commanders tried to frame the mission as a final, honorable sacrifice, urging the combined fleet to bloom as flowers of death. But even that grim goal proved unreachable. The Japanese fleets sailed too late and too far away. There was never a real chance to catch the American invasion armada during the landings. Leyte Gulf wasn't just a battle. It was the moment Japan's naval war ended in reality, long before the final surrender ever came. At best, Japanese commanders could hope to find empty transports or outdated invasion escorts inside Leyte Gulf. Hardly targets worth sacrificing the Imperial Japanese Navy for. The dream of a decisive surface battle against the United States was a relic of pre-war thinking, completely ignoring the massive imbalance in power, especially American naval air strength. Takeo Kurita may have had a narrow chance to push deeper into the Gulf after the clash with Taffy 3, but even if he had, it wouldn't have changed the outcome on land. Kurita had no way to influence the ground campaign, which was the real objective of Shogo from the start. And even a naval defeat didn't instantly decide the fate of the Philippines. While fleets clashed at sea, Douglas MacArthur pressed forward on land, determined to finally fulfill the promise he made back in 1942. But liberation didn't come fast or easy. The campaign to reclaim the Philippines would be long, bitter, and incredibly costly. As American forces pushed closer to Japan's main islands, the wider war was closing in on its final act. In Europe, Allied armies were advancing just as relentlessly. By early 1945, the United States, Britain, and France were preparing to cross the Rhine River, while Soviet forces stood poised along the Oder, ready to strike directly at Berlin. If you want to dive deeper into those final, brutal battles in Europe, we've got you covered. We produced 2 massive documentary series exploring these turning points in detail. For the Battle of Berlin, check out our 4.5-hour, 18-part series, 16 Days in Berlin, covering the entire fight day by day with detailed maps, animations, expert interviews, and more. If you're interested in the last great set-piece battle on the Western Front, don't miss Rhineland 45. This 3-hour, 5-part series follows the fighting from the Dutch border to the final crossing of the Rhine, using authentic combat footage and uncompromising detail. Because of strict advertising rules, Rhineland 45 isn't available on YouTube. Instead, you can watch it on Nebula, a creator-owned streaming service built with other independent educators. No algorithm pressure, no ad restrictions, just deep, thoughtful history. Nebula streams in crisp 4K and works on your browser, phone, smart TV, or streaming devices like Apple TV and Roku. Head to nebula.tv/realtime history to watch 16 Days in Berlin, Rhineland 45, Red Atoms, and a growing library of smart creators, all for just $36 a year. You can also grab a Nebula lifetime membership, pay once and get access forever. That option directly supports future original content and helps improve the platform for everyone. About 1/3 of each lifetime membership goes straight to supporting real-time history itself. We also want to give special thanks to Christoph Bergs for his expert help on this episode. If you want to explore more of the Pacific War, check out our documentaries on Saipan and Peleliu. And if you're watching on Nebula or Patreon, thank you. Your support makes projects like this possible. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is Real Time History, the only history channel that doesn't believe in miracles.